I always thought neighbors were supposed to bring a little peace into your life, or at least mind their own business. But from the moment I moved onto Maple Street, I realized peace can be fragile, especially when the wrong person lives next door. I still remember my first sight of Mrs. Keller, tall, sharp-eyed, and already watching me like I was a stain on her perfect world. I was unloading boxes, sweating from the move, when she stood on her porch and said, without a greeting or even a hint of civility, "You planning to keep things tidy? We like order here." That was my first warning, and I should have taken it seriously. One didn't. During that first week, I tried to be friendly. I waved every time I saw her, hoping she'd drop the icy glare, but she never did. If my grass grew an inch too long, she stared. If a leaf fell on her side of the driveway, she glared like I personally placed it there. Then came the first real confrontation. I was fixing a loose fence panel when she marched straight over, announcing that I'd replaced it incorrectly. She insisted it leaned into her property, even though it clearly didn't. I told her I'd double-check, trying to keep things civil. But she snapped that it needed to be fixed today, because in her mind, nothing ever slides in the neighborhood. That night, I caught her walking around my yard with a flashlight, crouching by the fence, inspecting my mailbox, hovering near my porch. It didn't feel like normal neighbor behavior. It felt like she was searching for something to blame me for. Soon after, I found a note taped to my door, complaining that my porch light was too bright and shined into her bedroom window, even though her house was 2 properties away. I replaced the bulb anyway. A few days later, another note appeared saying my trash can was 2 inches off the curb line and declaring it my first warning. It was clear this woman was looking for reasons to start a fight. I told myself things would settle, that she'd lose interest. But people like Mrs. Keller don't get bored. They escalate. And I had no idea just how far she was willing to go. The first attack wasn't traumatic or loud. It arrived in the form of a letter from the Homeowners Association, claiming that I had caused excessive noise during late hours. I work from home. I go to bed early. The accusation was ridiculous. When I called the HOA office for clarity, the woman on the phone sighed and asked if I lived near Keller's house and warned me to document everything. That was when I installed my first camera. It took only 2 days for that camera to expose the truth. At 5:14 a.m., Mrs. Keller walked across the edge of my property carrying a small bag. She crouched and sprinkled a white powder along my driveway. Later, I discovered it was rock salt, which can damage car tires, and did. When I confronted her, she looked me dead in the eye and said, "Prove it," smiling as if she enjoyed the challenge. The next morning, my mailbox was bent backward, the bolts loosened deliberately, and another HOA complaint arrived claiming my dog barked past midnight. I didn't even own a dog. When I approached the HOA office, all they told me was to gather evidence because she is persistent. I installed 2 more cameras, not because I wanted to watch her, but because she would not stop watching me. It became obvious this wasn't a personality clash. She was escalating on purpose. She wanted me scared. She wanted me overwhelmed. She wanted to teach me some twisted version of order she believed she ran on this street. But she didn't know one thing about me. I don't break easily. And she had just turned herself into my full-time focus. Things didn't calm down. They got worse, with the police showing up at my door because she reported machinery noises at 2 a.m. I showed the officers camera footage, proving I'd been asleep. They sighed, saying they had no choice but to respond whenever she called. She watched from her driveway as the officers left, lips curled in triumph, loudly criticizing some people who don't know how to live in a decent neighborhood. I ignored her, and the fact that I didn't react made her even angrier. Her next move was petty but public. She put a sign on her lawn reading, "Quiet Community. Some people should learn respect." It didn't name me, but it didn't need to. The entire street knew who it was aimed at. What she didn't know was that while she enjoyed her little show, karma was quietly building against her. I had friends in local administration. When I showed one of them the footage and the letters, he told me she was already on a warning list. One more serious complaint, and she could face penalties. I didn't celebrate, not yet. People like her don't fall easily. They fall hard. And the right pressure hadn't hit her yet. The real breaking point came on a morning that should have been simple. I had a major client meeting, one that could shape my next 6 months of work. Minutes before the call started, Mrs. Keller began hammering at my front door. I opened. It defined her demanding that I move my trash cans because they looked messy. When I told her I was about to start an important call, she shouted even louder, accusing me of disrespecting the neighborhood. Her shouting went straight into my live microphone. My client heard every word. The call became awkward and tense. And shortly after, they emailed to postpone the contract. Just like that, I lost months of work because my neighbor wanted to pick a fight. When I went outside later, she stood smiling, telling me that people like me need discipline. But what she didn't know was that my camera caught everything, her shouting, her threats, the chaos she caused. And the next morning, she left a fake notice on my window, claiming my porch was unsafe. Printed on cheap paper, not from the city. That was the moment I stopped trying to coexist. She wasn't trying to annoy me. She was trying to break me. And I finally saw her for what she was, someone who needed to be stopped. The final push came when neighbors confronted me about threatening text messages I supposedly sent them. The messages were abusive, aggressive, and clearly written to make me look like a danger. Except I hadn't sent them. Someone had spoofed my number. Someone who had too much time and too much hate. And when I looked across the street, Mrs. Keller was already on her porch, smirking like she'd just destroyed me. Instead of yelling, I showed the neighbors something they didn't expect, footage of her trespassing, tampering with my property, and sprinkling salt across my driveway. Their anger shifted instantly. One neighbor admitted she had driven away 2 previous renters. Another confessed she'd harassed nearly everyone on the street. The only reason people stayed silent was fear. That day, I realized I wasn't alone. Everyone had been suffering. They were just waiting for someone to stand up. And I became that person. I spent hours compiling every piece of evidence I had. Video, audio, letters, timestamps, false reports. Even the morning she ruined my work call. When I finished, the file was huge. Inside it, I found something she'd overlooked, a long list of city ordinances she had violated repeatedly, from harassment to false reporting to trespassing. She thought she was untouchable. She wasn't. Karma had been watching her longer than I had, and it was finally ready to deliver. After collecting every piece of evidence, I didn't rush to confront her. That would have been foolish. Mrs. Keller thrived on chaos and attention. She wanted to provoke, to make me lose control. So I waited, plotting carefully. The first step was to ensure the HOA and local authorities understood the full scope of her behavior. I compiled the footage of her trespassing, the audio of her yelling, the fake notices, the salt on my driveway, and the false complaints, and organized everything with timestamps and dates. I sent a detailed report to the HOA manager, highlighting repeated violations of neighborhood rules and city ordinances, making it impossible for them to ignore. I also discreetly spoke with a few neighbors, showing them snippets of evidence, letting them understand the extent of her harassment without publicly shaming anyone yet. The goal was subtle but powerful. Build pressure around her from all sides, turning her own actions into the weight that would bring her down. While she believed she had control, She had no idea how carefully every move she had made was being recorded, analyzed, and documented. I didn't need to be loud. I needed to be effective. The plan started quietly but efficiently. The HOA issued formal warnings backed by my evidence, demanding that she cease her harassment and follow the community rules. I also provided the police with recordings of trespassing and property tampering, ensuring there was a clear legal record. As days passed, I noticed a change. She was no longer bold enough to harass me directly. The smirk had disappeared from her face. Her daily inspections, once fearless and brazen, became cautious. Her emails and letters started to dwindle. And while I maintained the calm exterior of a neighbor just trying to live, the neighborhood slowly began to recognize her behavior for what it was, not just quirky or strict, but aggressive and damaging. People who had previously been silent began to speak up quietly, sharing stories of prior harassment, all of which I documented. With each step, the pressure mounted. She was being exposed, cornered not by me emotionally, but by the truth of her own actions, and she couldn't escape the consequences she had set in motion. The most satisfying part wasn't legal enforcement. It was watching karma take its natural course. Mrs. Keller had built a life on intimidation, thinking her reputation as the strict, untouchable neighbor would shield her. But as her violations became official record, her friends and acquaintances started to notice her pattern of behavior. One by one, she began to lose influence over the street. The HOA imposed fines for repeated violations. The police opened a formal harassment file. Even casual neighbors who had once avoided confrontation began treating her differently, no longer afraid of her cold glare or sharp words. She attempted petty retaliations, moving a garden gnome slightly out of place, whispering insults from her porch. But these gestures fell flat. Nobody feared her anymore, and the isolation she had indirectly created around herself became her own punishment. Watching her lose the power she once wielded so carelessly was strangely poetic. She had invested years in controlling others, but the same meticulous eye I had used to document her actions had turned the tables completely. The culmination of the plan came quietly, without theatrics. A final meeting with the HOA confirmed that repeated violations and harassment had triggered the highest level of penalties allowed. Mrs. Keller was officially cited for trespassing, harassment, and falsifying reports against neighbors. Her fines were substantial, and she faced strict oversight for any future complaints. More importantly, she had lost the respect and fear she had used to manipulate the community. When she tried to rally other neighbors to her side, they hesitated, remembering the evidence and the stories they had quietly shared with me. She realized too late that the life she had built on intimidation was unsustainable. All the smirks, all the whispered threats, all the letters and fake notices amounted to nothing against clear documentation and measured persistence. That day, she stood on her porch, visibly defeated, no longer the figure of authority she had once thought she was. I didn't gloat. I simply watched, satisfied that justice had been served, not by chaos or revengeful acts, but by carefully letting her own behavior speak for itself. Looking back, the experience taught me a lesson about patience, persistence, and the nature of justice. People like Mrs. Keller thrive on fear and manipulation, but their power is fragile when confronted with evidence and truth. Revenge doesn't need to be loud or destructive. It can be precise, intelligent, and methodical. The moral isn't just about karma hitting those who think they are untouchable. It's about standing up calmly, documenting clearly, and using strategy instead of anger. Justice, when approached with patience, often arrives more thoroughly than rash action ever could. Neighbors, communities, and workplaces all have Kellers, people who seem untouchable until someone quietly pays attention, gathers evidence, and ensures fairness prevails. At the end of the day, I didn't just survive the harassment. I changed the neighborhood dynamic. I reminded everyone, including Mrs. Keller, that intimidation cannot last when confronted with truth. And for me, that quiet victory, earned through careful observation and persistence, felt far more satisfying than any moment of loud confrontation could ever have been.